Hello, 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 and happy Wednesday. For those of you where it's happy Wednesday. Now, some of you are catching me overseas and it's already Thursday morning, but hello, hello, and welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Twanna Carter, career transition coach, and I help high achieving professional women overcome that doubt and anxiety that can come along with shifting to a career, getting a new promotion, or landing that new job, and an imposter syndrome just starts walking and interfering with your life. And I do that by helping women understand, to recognize, understand, and communicate their unique values. So, and also as well as by instilling in just insensible belief in their own strengths and abilities so that they can confidently and courageously create success on their own terms and pursue a path of purpose that's meaningful to them. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm gonna pop on. I'm live streaming through a couple of different media platforms tonight, and so if you can hear me, just let me know you can hear me. Right? Drop here in the comments and let me know where you are hopping on from. Meanwhile, I also want to check to be sure you can hear me. It's no fun looking at someone talk and you can't hear unless you are indeed a lip reader, right? So tonight we're talking about how to avoid the emotional overwhelm that women of color can often feel when they're the only one in the office who is, gotten a certain position in a certain place, and they start to feel responsible for the younger folks coming up behind them, and it just gets. Sometimes it can get out of hand, or sometimes it can just feel like it gets overwhelmed, right? Emotionally overwhelmed, is it right? And I can say that I was an officer. I got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. So when I got to my first permanent duty station, I was the first black female engineer most of my soldiers had seen in ever. My group that I was commissioned with, about 20 of us were forest branch engineers because they didn't have enough female engineers. And so, being I was one of very few black, like I said, second lieutenants, female. So, of course, there was this look of horror from the males when they saw me walking around with the castles on, because engineers have castles. So when I got to my first duty station, there was this like, holy cow, what do we do with her? But then it became, ooh, I want to be, I want to take my oath of enlistment with the black female lieutenant. I've never done that before, have you? And so they did. And so it went from a couple of people wanting me to do their, oath of enlistment, into every soldier in the unit wanted me to do their oath of enlistment. And of course, everybody that asked, I was like, yeah, sure, why not? It got kind of awkward when everybody wanted me to do their oath of enlistment and nobody wanted to come commander to do that. It got kind of awkward, but I felt like I couldn't say no. For them, it was history. They hadn't seen a black lieutenant female engineer ever in their careers, right? They'd never seen it. So it's like, how do I say no? Like, you're kind of making the come to commander look bad. No one's asking him, you're all asking me. And that was it was awkward. I didn't mind doing it, but it became awkward when I would look over and see all the white lieutenants standing nearby, and all the lieutenants were, all the soldiers were asking me, black, white, Hispanic, they were all asking me to do the oath of enlistment. It was to the point that I used to read the oath of enlistment, right? And so one of the senior NCOs was like, LT, you've read that enough. You need to know it. Next time you will not read. We're not giving you the paper. You need to memorize the entire oath of enlistment. And I did. I actually remember it today because so many people ask me to do it, and sometimes we can get overwhelmed because you do feel like the big sister sometimes if you're the woman of color and you're the most seeking, senior woman in that office. In my case, the most senior black female lieutenant they've seen, a black officer. It comes with responsibility, and you don't want to say no, but it can start to really pile on, right? And so, anybody out there, let me look at my comments, because I do want comments. I do want questions. How many of you have been a senior woman of color in the office where people basically looked up to you and they were all coming to you wanting some type of assistance, maybe not understanding what was going on, if they were new or if they run into some issues. You were kind of the go-to person, right? And so, I can say that I didn't necessarily feel overwhelmed, but it was an overwhelming sense of responsibility, if you can put it there. And over time, it can become emotional overload, right? And we'll kind of talk about why that is. So, again, if you have been a woman of color in a workspace, you were the senior one or one of two, whether you were really senior or like me, I wasn't senior. I was junior officer. I was a second lieutenant. I was like at the bottom of the food chain, just a half a step above warrant officers, but certainly the most junior officer there was. I was commissioned as a brand new second lieutenant. So I didn't feel like I was senior. I mean, I knew that I outranked all of my soldiers, of course, by rank, but feeling like I was in this position that was higher up and knew better. I really didn't feel that. I did not feel that. So sometimes if I did get overwhelmed, it was because people came to me because I was a second lieutenant and I outranked them, and they expected me to be imbued with this wisdom, like have some extra knowledge. You're an LT. I know you know what to do. And sometimes I was like, no, I don't really know what to do. Let me go find out. And sometimes, in addition to doing your job, that can get overwhelming, right? And again, I never wanted to say no. I'll be honest with you. I never wanted to say no, I'm not doing that, or no, that's too much, because I felt this overwhelming responsibility. I was the first one. I had to do things right. And I put all the extra stress, like, I gotta be perfect, I gotta do this, I gotta do this. That's what can go and cause that overwhelm, right? Is feeling that I'm in this space and there are people looking at me, expecting me to make mistakes, and there are people looking up to me, expecting me to maybe not be perfect. Maybe that was my own internal dialogue. I needed to be perfect, but I kind of felt that way, and it can get pretty lonely, right? Um, they did a survey. I used to be stationed in Fort Drum, New York, and this is I'm thinking lonely, so this comes up. Is they did this survey? Is military does, they do a survey, and they said, hey, everybody got to take this survey, and you will be anonymous. No one's going to know how you answer the question. So the question was, are you an officer? Are you enlisted? Hmm. You can kind of narrow that down. But okay, I was what, 20, 30,000 soldiers on the base. So I, of course, put down I was a female because, I was an officer rather. Then they asked, well, are you female, male, or female? Hmm. I'm an officer. That narrows it down. Saying that I was a female officer went from this to about this. Then they furthermore asked, what is your branch of service? What's your branch, rather? And it was like, yeah, I'm an engineer. Okay, so let's tell you how anonymous I was. I was the only female lieutenant who was an engineer on an entire base of over 20,000 soldiers. I'm real anonymous. I'm sure that no one's going to know what I said on that survey, right? And that is the thing, that if you're a woman of color and you walk into some spaces, sometimes you're it. It's like, tag, you're it. And depending, women tend to be socialized. We tend to be socialized to have this thing where we're caretakers, if not caretakers, we're big sisters or we're aunties, right? Sometimes it's auntie. And we feel responsible for taking care of other folks, especially, for instance, I was the oldest child. And so if you're the oldest kid and you're female, sometimes the tendency, certainly in my community, being African American, the tendency was that if you're a female and you're the oldest, you got extra responsibility. You were automatically seen as having some extra maturity. Not necessarily true, but you were seen as being that way, which means that you are a caretaker from a very early age, right? I can remember, they put you in the jail for this now, but I can remember, being about 4 years old or so, and my mom sat me on one side, and she set my older brother on the other side, who was about 3-ish or so, and in between the two of us, she set the baby, and he was like 8, 9 months. She would say, don't move. And she would go to the store, do her shopping, and come back, and I'd be sitting right there. It's a lot of responsibility for a kid. And like I said, we don't do that now, but my dad was at work. My mom had to do some things. She couldn't find a babysitter. There you have it, right? So early on, I became a caregiver. Well, guess what? When we're socialized that way, especially women of color, and we go into the workplace, we already have these coping mechanisms. We're already socialized to be there. So in the workplace, we become the same thing. We become the big sister. We become the auntie. We become sometimes the mommy of the office for other people of color who are looking up to us for advice or just problem solver or sometimes just to vent. And that can get overwhelming. So here's the thing. You don't have to have all the answers. I know that's hard to hear because if you're the big sister or you're the auntie, we're socialized to say, hey, I got all the answers. Yes, I can help you out. I can help you through this, right? And sometimes it feels guilty to say I don't have the answers, but here's what you do, right? So one of the things that I recognize is do get a circle of support. You really need a circle of support. And you need that circle of support to hold you accountable for self care. Because if you give, and you give some more, and you work, and you give, and you work, your self care starts to decline. And when that self care starts to decline, you will become burned out, you become stressed, you become anxious, you can become depressed because of all the stress and the pressures of feeling like, I've got to do this now. I'm that person, I got to help everybody. It starts to weigh on you. Have a circle of support who hold you accountable. You know, if you're that person, you get off work, you're meeting with people, you're calling people, you Zoom meeting people to help them. That circle of support, you got that accountability. How many hours of self care did you do this week? Did you really exercise? You said you're going to exercise 3 to 5 times this week. Did you really exercise? You said you were going to get a massage every month. Are you getting that massage? You said you get a mani pedi. Are you really holding to that and doing for yourself? You said you'd read. I'm telling off on myself here, right? My coach is my accountability person. It's like, yeah, I'm supposed to read, I think 3 or 4 books this quarter, so I'm behind. I'm reading 2 right now. But a circle of support will hold you accountable to yourself, taking care of yourself. And that is so important to have that because as you caretake for other folks, especially if you're a leader or you're the manager and you have 1,001 things always going on in the office and you're trying to help folks with their issues and things that are coming up, and you're the senior person or the only woman of color or the most senior woman of color, things can get kind of out of hand quickly and self-care can fall to the bottom of that list. So definitely you'll want a circle of support to hold you accountable for your self-care. Number 2, the thing that I recommend is you have to have boundaries. You need boundaries. You gotta have those boundaries, right? And I give you an example. And a lot of you maybe don't know that in addition to be a career transition coach, I am also a licensed therapist. So when I started school, started my master's degree, and of course your family and friends know it's a big deal when you start your master's program. And I was doing it in counseling, and all of a sudden, like 3 or 4 months into my program, like 3 to 4 months into the start of my program, I'll get these calls. You're a therapist. You're a counselor. You need to help me. You should be able to solve my problems. It got overwhelming quickly. Friends and family just expected me to know better, to do better, and to do all these things. And it's like, I'm like 4 months into my counseling program. It doesn't matter. You're a therapist. You should know how to do this. It quickly got overwhelming, and I had to establish boundaries. I didn't have a choice. People were started zigging me with their problems. They were calling me up and I need this or my friend does this and who knows. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So I had to set those boundaries, right? And so number 4, I'm going to do 2 and 4 together. Number 4 is rather than thinking that you have to have all the answers, you really don't. You need resources. And quickly, once I start setting my boundaries, I looked at, I don't have the answers to all these questions. I don't even have enough time in my life to go find the answers to all these questions. but I had a really good network from some previous jobs I'd done. And so I had a list of resources. And so when people would call me up and say, well, my sister's friend, she's having a problem. I need you to solve this problem for her. I would look at the problem and I would give her a resource. Now I will say I went a bit further this, and then I don't recommend you do this, but I would even talk to a person at the resource and I would say, this person's still there. Here's the number, call this person up by name. You don't have to do that, but you can have resources. If someone comes to you and, they start off talking work with you, they're having a problem with the supervisor, and then they get comfortable, and all of a sudden it's not just a supervisor, but they're having problems at home, or they're having financial problems, or they're having problems because they're caretaking for an elderly person and trying to do this job. That can go big, 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 bigger, right? So, wonderful resource is tell them to call their EAP, Employee Assistance Program. Most large organizations and even nonprofits will have an employee assistance program. Well, guess what? Have that number on your desk to do. I've done some training for EAPs. They will give you a card with all the EAP information on it. They'll also give you posters when you call them up. So when people kind of go over, they leave the professional realm and it goes over to the personal, and you see that they're struggling with some things, don't feel you have to answer those questions. Say, hey, you know what? Here's the number to the EAP. They can help you with that. Well, what do most EAPs cover? Number one is paid for by the employer, so the employee doesn't have to pay for it, right? I'm going to put that in the chat. Employee Assistance Program. How many people out there have used their EAP? It is a wonderful program, and again, it's already paid for. It is already paid for. It is free for the employee. And why am I bringing this up? Because they have expanded over the last 10 years or so. If your dog passes and you're having problems mourning the passing of your dog, your pet, your cat, what have you, well, you can call EAP up and get therapy for that. If you're having financial problems, many EAPs will provide 1, 2, or 3 sessions, right, for you to handle that. And then they often recommend out to a financial planner if that's the problem. Taking care of elderly parents, or you have a parent living with you in a home that you can't watch because now you have to go back to the job because you're not teleworking anymore. Call your EAP. They can help you finding caregiver support. So, or adult babysitting, adult daycare, and they can help you also if you're a caregiver. So again, even if you are that senior person in the office, you don't have to solve these issues. There is a resource. Having legal problems, getting a divorce, adopting a child, you got shared custody with the kid. Well, your EAP also provides 1, 2, or 3 sessions of legal support. Very simple. Have that resource on hand, especially because oftentimes when junior folks come to us, sometimes it's not just a problem with the job. Sometimes it is a personal problem that they're dealing with and they're having challenges on the job. So EAP is a wonderful resource. It keeps you from solving the problem because you don't need to be that. You don't need to be the office counselor, the office therapist, right? You want to stay out of that role. That is overwhelming, especially when you're not trained for it. As a matter of fact, those of us who are therapists, we take our time off. We have therapists too because it's overwhelming. Even though we're trained to do it, we got to have accountability to know when to step away and to get help. Same thing with you. Don't feel you've got to solve everybody's problem. So if you're just joining me, I'm talking about how to avoid emotional overwhelm when you are the senior woman of color in the office and people, the junior folks come to you because you're senior. You probably know it all, so they think. And it can be tempting to feel like you're the auntie or the big sister. It's tempting because you remember when you were that age, or you remember when you were starting off and how lonely that felt and how isolating that felt. And you wish there was one person in the office who looked like you that you can sit down and talk with. So it feels like a huge responsibility. You don't want to tell people no, and you feel guilty if you do. Well, again, a resource that I'm giving there is most large companies have it, many nonprofits have it. Some smaller companies will have it. Well, as your EAP program, your employee assistance program, they help with grief counseling. They can do, if you're having problems with marital counseling. If you got some wild teenagers who are working those nerves too, they help with that as well, right? They help with helping you find adult caregiver support, adult daycare and caregiver. They help with a myriad of things. Call them up. Typically, they're wanting people to use their services, so have the cards on your desk. Have their cards on the desk, or depending on how your, some companies are picky about that because you don't want to. If you're not the supervisor, you want to not be like referring people. You don't want to give a supervisor referral, but you can have the cards on your desk and point to like, here, right here, they help with that. It's a wonderful way to pull you out of having to solve the problem, right? And so if you were here, you know that I said number one is have a circle of support that holds you accountable for self-care so that you don't get overwhelmed. Number two, I said set boundaries, and I skipped down to number four, which is have resources so that you don't feel like you've got to be the one to always answer all the questions and solve all the problems, right? And then number three is important. Ask more questions than you give answers. It's a coach thing, like coaches and actually therapists. We love to ask questions, rather than feel like you got to provide all the answers. Sometimes people just need to process, especially women. We're processors. We tend to be processors. We just need to talk it out, get everything out of the head and talk it out. And sometimes if you start pinging those questions and asking back, people can resolve their own issues rather than you feeling like you've got to be overwhelmed by resolving all those issues, right? And then some other things that's really great, recommend that your junior folks find mentors. And you don't have to be the mentor, right? Not you. And a mentor doesn't have to be in your organization. A mentor, of course, can be outside. But recommend that they also find a mentor because there's nothing wrong. If you're a budget analyst, there's nothing wrong than having a mentor who's a budget analyst in another corporation. You still are getting the mentorship, and it's sometimes junior folks have problems with navigating office politics or reading cultures or fitting into the culture, especially if you're a minority. That's a tough thing. Because sometimes when we get those jobs and everybody talks about get a job, get a job, get a job, which is what we do as career transition coaches, right? And career coaches, but you don't always hear people talk about how to navigate that new culture once you get the job. And that is something that I do in my programs. It's not just about getting the job, but it's helping people deal with navigating the office politics, learning how to read people and how to express themselves. Because sometimes, depending on what side of the country you come from, and I can give you a great example. My first duty station was Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And I've never ran into so many condescending people who were from the North and talked about folks from the South as if we were ignorant. Yes, we may talk with a Southern drawl. Yes, some of us do. It doesn't make us ignorant. But because we spoke with the Southern drawl, there were some folks who were pretty dismissive of us. And it didn't matter if you were black, white, or Hispanic. If you had a Southern drawl, if you said, I'm from Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, there's a look that came over their face. And then they took on the tone of the big sister, the big brother to school you little dumb people from the South. It happens. And it happens when you're a person of color and you say, I went to this school, I come from this place. Some people will take that, put you in a box, and they're very they talk condescending to you. They speak to you dismissively. And for many junior folks of color going into the office, it is the first time they've run into that. And part of it's hurtful, part of it's angering, and then many are bewildered. I talk to a lot of folks who are just bewildered. Why would someone speak to me like that? Why would someone assume that about me? Right? It's tough. I mean, my first duty station, I remember them saying, and I didn't understand because I walked in the door and I'm speaking like I speak now, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, she's so eloquent. Oh, she speaks so well. Yeah, I was speaking like everyone else. Is there something wrong? And I got that comment over and over. And then I found out why. There was someone else who was from the same state I was, and she spoke with a stutter. And so, for whatever reason, I guess they assumed that all black women from Alabama were going to speak with the stutter. And when I came in speaking, I guess normally they were just impressed, and I was like, "Oh, so you're not impressed that I'm a distinguished military graduate? You're not impressed that I'm a distinguished military student and I graduated cum laude. You're impressed because I don't stutter and I speak straight in the tongue. Okay, really? That was hurtful. I kid you not. It was hurtful. Took a little bit to work over that and to get through. And I tell you, it was a significant emotional event, as they call it in the military. A C, because here I am, 30 something years later, talking about it. But people of color, we walk into the offices, people that do this. And some of these are microaggressions that people don't mean, but they're still microaggressions and they're still hurtful. And I speak to a lot of junior folks going to offices and even senior folks who try to figure out how to deal with that because they've never felt it before. There's like, no, I grew up in a very mixed neighborhood. My friends are mixed, they're black, white, they're Indian, they're Pakistani, they're everything. And I've never had to walk in a space as the only person of color and deal with this before. It's hurtful. So I actually help people negotiate going through those types of cultures because if you don't handle it, oftentimes, a lot of folks will end up with imposter syndrome thinking there's something wrong, and there really isn't, right? And so that's the reason why, there are junior folks in the office who are looking up to the senior folks because they're running into this on the job and they don't know how to handle it. And they're looking for you to do it. So it's a great thing, encourage them to get a mentor, encourage them to join support groups. I know that I did. We had a Black Officer Association. It wasn't anything that was formal, but it was informal where we get together and we talk about these things that were going on and how to navigate. Here's what happened when I did it. And again, if you, encourage people to join organizations like that or start to form them, then you don't feel so isolated, right? When we go into spaces and we feel isolated, it does elevate feelings of imposter syndrome. It elevates feelings of anxiety. It elevates feelings of depression when you're the minority, right? It just does. But if you can get a group of folks who are a great circle of support for you and you can collaborate, it takes away that isolation. I'm the only one. What's wrong with me? Why don't I feel comfortable? And I tell you the reason why this is so important because kind of going on a tangent here. But oftentimes I see women of color say, I'm not socializing with these people. I'm coming here to do my job and then I'm going home and I don't want to get to know anybody because they're hurt and they're angry. And sometimes they're tired of feeling like the outside person, like I got to prove to you who I am. And so they cut all ties. But if you're a networker, you understand true networking, you know that that's detrimental to networking on the job. And so again, there are several of us career coaches out here who help people in those types of environments. So you don't have to cut people off, but you don't have to lay down and be walked over either. And how to do that professionally, right? I know it's real easy. Alana said, agree. The words about isolation and yes. And I think I'm butchering your name. Is it Aliza Nets? Let me know if I'm pronouncing that right. Absolutely. Isolation just, I say this, you probably heard me say it several times. They showed a picture of a mountain to a person who was standing alone by themselves. They, described the mountain, described how tall it was, how high it seemed, and all of that, right? They showed the same person a picture of a mountain, but they were standing with a group of people. The mountain didn't seem as high. When we are around people, around friends, isolation goes away. So okay, it's I forgot what I said now. Alana Zanet. Yes, thank you. Forgive me if I'm butchering that again. But yes, isolation increases. If you know someone with depression, you understand that when people have depression, one of the first things they want to do is isolate and be alone, which is not good because it personifies the feelings. But we can feel like that in workplaces when we're oh, well, good. She tells me that's the correct pronunciation. Yes, good. I have a daughter and she's real picky about her name, so now I'm picky about making sure I say everyone else's name correctly. And so yes, the isolation does it, and what happens is we turn everything on ourselves, and then imposter syndrome can run wild with many people. Some folks don't get imposter syndrome; they get angry, and there's a especially if you're a black woman, the stereotype of being an angry black woman is if we're just angry off the cuff and we have nothing better to do. Sometimes, and not sometimes, anger is typically a secondary emotion and it hurts, right? and there are other things beyond it. So sometimes she's so Lanzanet says she loves being around people. Same, in mine is a little, I'm funny about that. I was thinking about that today. I literally was on a conference call before this, and I knew I was going on live, and I needed to. I'm an introvert. I needed to rejuvenate quickly because I had several meetings with people today. I like being around people, but I'm an introvert and I need that alone time. So I had the camera turned off, and I just had to get some quiet time so I can come on and be on, when I'm doing the live. So absolutely, absolutely. And so that isolation, that's why it's so important. If you can't, collaborate with folks inside the organization just yet, find someone to collaborate with, be it your sorority sisters, um, there are a lot of professional organizations. Like I said, if you are a project manager or budget analyst or management analyst, an attorney, there are professional organizations. Join those so you don't feel like you're isolated and left alone. You need a is um my business coach had a Facebook ads manager that came in, and she used to say this all the time. You need to find your peeps, and I love that, and I actually use that still. You need to find your peeps. And so Alana says you did great gathering before you pour to others. It's so important, and my energy just when it's off, it's off. And if I'm gonna do this, I don't want to sit here and just be kind of deadpan, like I'm just trying to say some words and get off here. I don't like to do that. At least I try not to. And thank you, Alana said. I don't know why I can't get this today. I must be tired. Alana Zanette. I love that name as well. Beautiful name. So yes, again, if you're just popping on, we're talking about how to avoid emotional overwhelm when you are the senior woman of color in an organization and the junior folks are coming to you for help. I talked about collaboration, with your, have a circle of support who hold you accountable to your self care, and as well as about, being making sure, right, that you set boundaries. Set boundaries. If you say you're going to be at the office at 5 o'clock every day, be out of the office at 5 o'clock every day. If you find yourself being there 11, 12, 1, 2, you're set those boundaries and keep them. Yes. So a lot of Zanette says employee resource groups gives you plenty of opportunities. It does. It really does. And knowing, having that information again, having it there at your fingertips. So, and I keep resources. And so whether people contact me by email or text message or whatever, I'm able to zing them out those resources so they can go do it for themselves. And number one, it's people feel good when they're doing things for themselves and not always when you're doing it for those. Why do we miss the mark with setting boundaries? Because oftentimes women don't like to tell people no, and that's socialization. If you and I'm guilty. Let me just say this: I have 3 girls, and I'm guilty of this. Good girl, big girl, you did this. Good girl. So we're socialized to get that praise. Good girl, big girl, you're so big. I love you. You're such a great girl. Look what you did. We're socialized for the praise. And we grow up to be grown women who still want that praise and we want the approval. So we neglect setting boundaries because we want praise and the approval, right? We're big girls who still search for that. And that socialization follows us into the workplace. It does. And so when you go in, especially, like me, I've been in a lot of spaces where I was the only, or one of two, or one of three. And I remember how isolating that felt. So when I got to be the person where I'm the senior person, I don't want anybody else to feel like I felt. And so you take on that, approval and wanting to help people, but you have to set the boundaries. And it's tougher when you're younger. And someone brought out to me that, yeah, it's easy when you're in your 40s to 50 to go set those boundaries and say no. It's tough when you're in your 20s and your 30s, right? You have to learn how. And I think I was, I remember doing Desert Storm, I had to be rushed to the hospital for exhaustion, coughing up blood and all that good stuff before I had to learn how to start setting some boundaries. It still took me a while to get it right, but I literally ended up in the hospital on my back. And it was not a great feeling. And I realized I had to start to set those boundaries. And that was the first time in my life that I actually started. Now, today, I don't have those problems, but in my 20s and 30s, I had to learn that. Some folks, like, I don't have a problem at all. I will throw down a boundary and say, don't cross it. If you do, we're done. I wasn't that person. Again, many women are socialized to be caregivers or be giving, and then we're also socialized with praise. That's approval, right? If they can learn how they would do better. Yes, if young people, yes. So I love this book. I tell a lot of people about it. It is Boundaries by Doctors Cloud and Townsend. I will say the book is they quote a lot of scripture, but they also talk with other religions in there, but it is heavily Christian based. But it is a absolutely wonderful book that I wish I had read in my 20s, because they go through all the different types of folks who cross your boundaries, from parents, mom to daughter, dad to daughter, to folks in the church, to husbands and wives and family and people at work. And it really goes through and tells you how to set boundaries. You will find yourself, if you have problems setting boundaries, you will find yourself over and over. I did. It is a wonderful book to read, and I'm going to pop that in here. It's Boundaries, and I always get the first name wrong, but it's Boundaries, and it's Doctors Cloud. I think it's Cloud and Townsend for sure. I know Townsend. It is a wonderful book. I have given this out to so many people. If you have problems with boundaries, this book is wonderful, right? It is absolutely wonderful. Um, yes, so Lana Zanet says a passion for setting boundaries. Yeah, you have to. If you want to be protected, you really do have to, because some people, we call them energy vampires. They will just suck you dry, and so you have to learn how to set those boundaries. Right? You got to set the boundaries and start off early. The earlier you start, the easier life will be. And I always say this to my folks when we work on boundaries: when you start setting boundaries, you're really gonna piss some people off. You just will. You will. It's gonna happen. I'm telling you now, you will. And as I often tell folks, you make people angry because when you set boundaries, you cut off access to the things you're getting from you. And then they will get upset with you because you're not giving, and it can be anything, right? you know, Sometimes people want your time. They can call you up, hey, can you cook me this? Can you do that? Can you do this? You're like, sure, no problem. You don't want to. You wish you had said yes, because sure, no problem. Some folks, it's money. It's because some of us are giving with their money. We're consistently giving money. When you set a boundary where I'm not giving you money, they're not really upset with you. They're upset because they can't get your money, right? So sometimes it's time, sometimes it's boundaries, sometimes it's things. Let me borrow your car, let me borrow this, borrow that. And so when you set boundaries and you cut access off, that's why people get angry with you. And I always want people like that. And so resilience, yes. Once it takes. Here's the thing about it: you cannot build resilience until you go through experiences. And what does experience mean? It means we've made some mistakes. We make a mistake, we learn from it, then we build resilience. We make mistakes, we learn from it, then we build resilience. All right. So for the folks out there that are like me, risk averse, had to be, perfect. Everything had to be perfect. Making mistakes was tough. I used to beat myself up, but now I realize that's how we build resilience, right? Without making mistakes, there's no experience. Okay. Yes. And so Alana Zanet says emotional intelligence. Absolutely. It is something that you have to build, right? To if you want to set those boundaries. And it's also emotional intelligence tells you how to deal with folks after you set those boundaries up. Because some people are takers and some people are givers. And the takers will tend to be a little upset with you, but you definitely build resilience when you set those boundaries and stick to them, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, again, today I just wanted to do some chatting today about, avoiding the emotional overwhelm when you are the senior woman of color in the office, right? And so, again, have that resource. That was number 4, which I actually covered. With number 2, build a list of resources. Don't feel you got to know all of the answers, because guess what? You don't. You don't have to know all of the answers. Ask more questions than you give answers. And What about this? Have you thought about that? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Try to make them open-ended questions so that people can really think. You're really pulling it out and people can think. We have within us what we need. We all have intuition. We all have that gut intuition. Some of us just don't necessarily listen to it as much as we used to. Some of us allow more data and knowledge to overwhelm or quieten that intuition, but we actually have it, right? We talk about the gut feeling or the gut reaction. There is actually a connection between the brain and the gut. That's intuition. And some of us listen to it, many of us don't, right? And so that goes back to that, spending time alone. I'm an introvert, so I got to have my time alone. But even extroverts, spending time alone sometime and getting used to getting back into connection with your intuition because it will guide you, right? And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is what I have for you today. Are there any other questions or comments out there? Let me go over here. I'm trying to see if I answered all of the comments or questions. When you execute, that's the biggest piece, all right? It's anybody can know knowledge, right? But the most important part about knowing the knowledge is executing, right? It's about getting that, understanding and actually taking the action. You are so welcome, Alana Zanette. I appreciate you being here and I thank you for that. So, if you are new to an environment or not even new, if you're just struggling in that environment because of some of the things that I mentioned, I do provide a free career a chat. I do that for everybody. All you got to do is sign up. And so I'm going to pop that. And I know some of these are popping up in different places. I will go around to all the places, to YouTube, as well as Facebook, and I think as well as LinkedIn. And I'll drop these links there, but I'm going to drop those links. It's a 15-minute chat, it doesn't cost you anything. And um, it's just nice to sit, right, and chat with someone who understands, right? Because again, we put so much emphasis on getting that job that we kind of forget what happens after we get that job. Trying to fit in, especially if you're the only person of color. So Alana Zanet says knowledge from experience. Absolutely, absolutely, right? It truly is, and it takes. I think many of us have just felt, I was that person. I was that person. I was the person who was, number one, I have social anxiety. So I didn't do a great job of going in, warming up, and talking to people. And that's what was tough, is because really the first 90 days, you got about 90 days to really make an impression, make a great impression, and move forward. And I didn't. I didn't do that because I have social anxiety. I take time to warm up to folks. Then, if that environment felt unwelcoming or people were dismissive, or, in my case, I found out that everybody thought, it was special because I could speak English. Those things are hurtful. You have to learn how to get over that. And it takes a minute. It takes a minute. And I tell folks, I didn't get a mentor until I was in my 50s, but do spend time working on finding a mentor. And for those of you who are the senior woman of color in your office, do not feel like you got to be everybody's mentor. If you have a network of folks where you can start referring people out, if people ask you resources, refer out as much as you can so that you don't become overwhelmed thinking that you're the one who has to do it all. You are so welcome, Alana Zanet, and I'm gonna sign off, folks, and I'm gonna go on my introvert journey, get some peace and quiet. Until tomorrow. Actually, I am actually in Alabama, so that's why my background has changed. And I love walking at nighttime down here. It's a safe neighborhood, so I'm gonna actually go walk and get my exercise in for the night because that's what I love to do when I'm here. So I bid you all goodbye. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next week, same bat time, same bat place. So look for the invite; it will be there. Take care. Bye bye.